Hey everyone, Dan here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button and keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not meant to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work for yourself, and make your decisions based on that. Enjoy. All right, folks, here we are over the weekend of Saturday, October 7th. We're going to take a look at 6 stocks today. We're going to kick things off with NVOS GOEV, then FEMY, NVTA RVLP, and finish things off with NIO. On each of these stocks, we're going to start here on the Webull chart and add in any levels or trend lines that we see. And then we're going to flip over to the Think or Swim study and see where each of them are situated in the channel, as well as the TTM squeeze indicator. So interestingly enough here on NVOS, obviously we had a huge down day today, down almost 30%. And so we're not going to get into, the catalysts and the movers or whatnot. We're really going to focus on the chart. But we have a bit of a chart challenge ahead of us. We see this up gap that we had that's partially filled, this 38 cents up to 61 cents. Which must be, which is left way back here. So a long time ago, about a year ago, actually. And it's partially filled it recently, but it still has quite a bit to go if it's going to fill it. At the same time, today, with such a move, as you can imagine, we get a big down gap. Now, the upside to this gap we can put in here, because this is also, it's very close, but it's, a support and resistance level that we have in 42.78. But we're just going to have to keep an eye and just know that there's like the potential for, upside gap fill here. That said, this is just a couple of pennies shy of getting into this 38 anyway. So I'm not too concerned that it's going to be, wildly confusing. Now that I'm saying this, I think we could just move this down to here. And while these will no longer signify the same gap, it will at least show where the gaps are. Gap from the bottom gray to the purple-ish, we can refine it as we get, closer in. And then we still have that gap that has not finished filling yet, that stretches all the way up there to the 61.09. Now this one, if we put it in correctly, it was a high of today, 36.49. Okay, so we're part of a penny off, and it's not going to let me do it. All right, so we're going to get as close as we can. Webull doesn't want to let me stick it on there. Exactly, so we're within a fraction of a penny. So to just note that. Now, we had big gaps in the price action here. Those are persisting, obviously, because we had big movements up through them, right? Each time that it's passed through this range, from like this purple down to this gray, it's made some relatively big motions. Like this was sort of a smaller one, right? But this level at 39 really tied into this level that we have here. That one might actually be developing as a stronger level, to be honest. You might want to think about changing that in the days ahead. So we'll take a look at that in the next video, depending on what the price action does here. Because if it continues to retreat, then we're going to want to address, anything left to the downside. There's a gap down here as well. Right, it would enter this gap around 26.25 and would fill it down here at about 23. So there is that to also be aware of, and we can call it out if we get tighter into there next week. We're just gonna have to see what the price action does, but for now there still is a lot of potential run room, I think, if it did want to peel back up next week. Now, I don't know if the catalysts, the news items will let it, and the overall sentiment around the stock based on those things will let it. But if it were to be able to, or if and when it returns to these price levels, we have a gap here, like a literal gap, and then we also have sort of gaps in the price action where things seem to hit some relatively smooth sailing in both directions. So that's what I would be keeping in mind for NVOS in the days ahead. Now on the Think or Swim study, this is also on the daily FYI. This is the 180 to 200 EMA cloud. Interestingly enough, swooping in here as of late, sort of struggled to get through it, as you see on these days here, ultimately popped out, but also left the channel when it did that, came down, tried to catch support on it, ultimately needed the mid-range of the channel, which is what we would expect. A little pullback here, and then big fire up through it again. Didn't catch nearly as much resistance this time through as it did this time, so that's interesting. And now falling right there on support again today to end the day. Not only is this now in line with the mid-range of the channel, but that's also where the support got caught, either because it got timed out today, which could always be the case, or because there is some really solid support there because of the 180 to 200 EMA cloud, plus it is the mid-range of the channel, which is where we would look for it to try to catch support. So if I'm going into next week trying to figure out what's going to happen, I'm really interested, I'm most interested actually, to see what it does with this cloud and what it does with this mid-range. It's probably one and the same. Can it at least pin itself to it and try to build a base over it? Does it quickly lose it? And if it does it sort of make this motion a slight retracement, or does it need retracement all the way down to the lower bound of the channel like we saw back here? That's my question. Or does it show motion where it can quickly sort of rebound and try to make its way back up again, catching that and confirming it as strong support? Those are sort of the three options, but this is not a crystal ball prediction. This is a, here's what we're going to look for, but we do have to wait and see what it does in those moments. All right, so that's NVOS. I'm going to switch over to GOEV. Let me just get this set up here so I don't forget. Okay, so GOEV, also pretty big down today. Now, unfortunately, this is doing the thing that I warned about maybe in the last video or whenever we put this in, was, it broke through this downtrend resistance, but it didn't get enough distance. It tried really hard, but right now it's really curling back strong back toward this again. Now it's not quite down as far as it would need to go to be treating this as what I call, in the saddest of moments, as downtrend support, but it's getting darn close. So something to keep in mind there. Now also you see the push here in days gone by. We had this big push up into the 80s. We had a double bottom there, and then when we pushed up most recently, we got a higher high than this swing high, but nowhere near this swing high up into the 80s. So, then a big gap down here, sort of filled it with the wick of this candle maybe, and then kind of triple bottoming here. But I think potentially what happened here, we'll see what it does at this level, but potentially what happened is it did that thing that I point out sometimes, which is it went to the well too many times. In other words, it kept dipping down here to like that 42 level and expecting bulls to come in and save it and provide the support, and eventually the bulls just get sort of burned out of coming in at that price and saving the stock, and they aren't showing up there anymore. So so I'm interested to see, but we're sort of in no man's land at the moment. I mean, you zoom out to the weekly and you can see, and even if you zoom out to the monthly, we're at our lowest point with this 40. And so there isn't much previous price action to go off of. And it's slipped these recent lows where it sort of double bottomed. And if we count this as its most recent swing, this swing high pathetically lower than this one. So, not great signs and symbols from this at the moment. Does it mean that it can't gain support here right around this 42 level and start to pull itself back up? Of course, it could certainly do that, but I'm really interested to see what it does. And if it does start to put in price action below this 42, then we will at least have that to be able to put in some levels. But right now there is just nothing to go off of. So in those situations, what can we rely on? We can rely a little bit more, can lean a little bit more on a think or swim study, and at least see where the channel is situated and the TTM squeeze indicator. So as far as the TTM squeeze indicator goes, bearish momentum picking up has sort of slowly and systemically died down, though picked up in recent days. So we'll see if that continues to be the case or not. We see it sort of had a similar tune here and it briefly flipped bullish, but then quickly drew back down again. And so at this point, it didn't even revert to the baseline on the histogram before it pulled back into bearish momentum again. So again, we'll see that could be a hiccup candle. Those happen sometimes. Like here's a hiccup candle. But we'll just have to see. Now, you know, it has some relatively erratic action, but it's mostly as of late, you know, aside from here, staying within the channel. So bottom bound of the channel gets support over the mid-range, tests the upper bound of the channel, retests the mid-range, loses support, comes down in. Now it's just now starting to sort of come close to the lower bound of the channel. So it's just kind of a slow and steady bleed at the moment. It's not really coming down to the lower bound of the channel and kind of ripping off the band-aid and then getting a bounce back like we saw here. It was a little bit more in that vein. And so, you know, while it has been able to retest the mid-range of the channel recently, which, you know, could have been a good opportunity where it didn't need to come down and test the mid-range or the lower bound of the channel and quickly reverted to the mid-range. But what did it do when it got there, right? That's the question. That's always the point of it testing the mid-range. What does it do when it gets there? It's not that it can just do it, but what does it do when it gets there? And what it did when it got there was it didn't even get any action over it. Between this candle and this candle, it just confirmed resistance there and then has continued to trickle down in recent days. So, you know, as far as the channel setup goes, it's going to need to retake the mid-range of that channel, not just because that's going to mean that it's at a higher price point, but it's going to be what opens the door for a potential to run to the upper bound of the channel. I don't know that it would, even if it got support over the mid-range, but it at least cracks open the door. This, being just perpetually trapped underneath it, doesn't even give it an opportunity to make that kind of motion. So that's what I'd be looking for mostly as we get into the days ahead. FEMY. Woo-wee! Wild and wacky. So up 96% this day, 30% this day, and then down 36%, down 8%, down 9%, down 3%. So, I mean, talk about just, you know, wavy gravy, wild, chaotic motion. And where are we sort of historically? Okay, so we have some action back here. Let me see. Let's see what we can glean from the last time that it was sort of in the twos, if you will. See if there's anything interesting to pull out. Yeah, I'd put this level in. All right, so let's give ourselves some levels. This is the first one of this video. We're going to get ourselves some levels. I kind of like this one better. Yep. It's a little bit higher than that swing high. Pretty choppy, but so not super clean. We'll see. We might want to tweak these a little bit when we go over to the most recent price action. Okay, let's start with those and see how those played out. Okay, I'm happy with that. This one, okay, we can zoom in and see if it made sense. It's a nice level off the wick there. Nothing super interesting to take from these yet. Let's zoom into the intraday and see how we were looking if we had these on the chart. Okay. Okay. So if we get some motion back up above this 236, we can put more in. Obviously, it can move quite a bit. So I'll put a few of these in. Don't necessarily have a much better time frame probably to pull these off of, so I'm okay, you know, going a little bit more risky than I normally would, putting these from the 10 minutes onto the chart. But it's what we have, and some of these are actually, if they hold, relatively decent levels. Okay. All right. So we have those plotted up there. Pause here for a sec just to see plotting up toward $4. Not quite there, but again, if it gets up there, we can come revisit. In the meantime, you know, if you had these levels on the chart and you were coming into today, you would have seen it sort of wrestling with this 215, skipping a level and confirming 181, and then coming back to confirm the level it skipped, testing that 215 again, and then just kind of trapping itself between that 2, which is obviously a strong psychological level, I would presume, and the 215. So decent motion today. Let's see where things are situated with the wild action on the daily here. So yeah, so as you would expect, stretched well out of the bounds of the channel, the cloud's way out of the channel, but it came down, and when it tried to test the cloud as support, it didn't even come close to holding it. Immediately sucked itself into the channel, and then sort of tried here again, but you know, kind of gave way pretty quickly. So it's giving way quickly and easily to the cloud support and to this upper mid range support. Now we'll see if this is able to hold, but if not, it may need to come down and retest the mid range of that channel, which again is what we'd expect. It doesn't mean it has to do it now. It could do it in the future, but you know, it is something to note, and I would look for it to do that at some point in the future. But in any case, it's sort of trying to hold this. This is hard to see, but there's a light gray here, and it dipped below it today, but it recovered nicely. And so my question would be, can it hold that upper mid range of the channel for now? Again, if it continues to put in price action above the mid range of the channel, that mid range of the channel is going to creep up. So that's going to sort of, you know, come up to it as much as anything else, and can help it sort of get there. You do see on the TTM squeeze indicator in the days recently triggered and then fired while it just sort of maintained its status quo, if you will. That was for 6 or 7 candles here, and then that set off the big fireworks. So maybe sort of a decent call out there on the TTM squeeze indicator. Sometimes I'm reluctant to give it too much credit, but it's not bad. And yeah, but those would be my main focuses besides the levels over here, would be, can it hold this mid-upper bound of the channel, or does it need to come down and test this guy here? And if so, like we've said before, what does it do if and when it gets there? NVTA, so the levels today, this is obviously some sort of a gap level. I don't know if it's filled now. We'll see when we zoom out. But if we were coming into today, you would have seen strong sell-off here to open, but really quickly regained support at this 62 level. Sort of made its way easily through to the 63.98, and then started to, you know, sort of sidestep around this purple level, 66.50. Couldn't come up to that 70 level, and then coming back down because the bulls just weren't showing up at that point in time to this 66.50. So, you know, a little bit of a, relatively speaking, sideways-ish day today, but nice motion on the intraday there. I'm pulling out to the daily and see where that situates us. Can't recall. Was this gap? Okay, so this gap is now filled, so we can get rid of this guy, and we can just make this blue again so that we don't think it keeps representing a gap. Now it's just a support and resistance level. We do have a pretty big price gap here where we don't have levels, sort of a level gap, I guess we could say. 67, I'll put this in for now. We'll see if this holds. It's just wick, so more of a wick level, but 67.84. We'll see if that continues to play a role. But trying to hold now, right? We had a big low here, and then a really big swing high, and then pulled back down, and then it's appearing that this swing low, unless we get just sort of like catastrophic motion next week, could have put in a higher low than this low here. And maybe it's going to start to put in an additional swing. So we'll see. I don't know that it'll be able to get a swing up over this high, which is quite, you know, substantially higher than where it is now. But we'll see how it works through the levels. Or like I said, if it does sort of capitulate and lose ground and settle in below this 62 somewhere, or even below this 60 somewhere, we can come in and put some levels in there. We just don't have them right now, but I don't want to come in and add a ton of levels until we get additional price action in there either, because let me see if we zoom out here. Yeah, there's historically not going to be anything to go off of. So anything that we're going to get is going to be sort of new anyway. So we might as well wait for the fresh candles to come in. This is where I start to lose my voice. NVTA on Think or Swim. So, you know, here we see, okay, that didn't get too ugly, so that's good. So many days back, left the channel, and we always look for it to come back down and retest the mid-range. It did that. It lost support, flipped it to resistance, and it's been riding that lower bound of the channel to the mid-range test ever since. Most recently, riding the red wave cloud, which is not what you want to see if you're a bull. But then it had a big, strong push to test the mid-range of the channel, but the question is always, what does it do when it tests the mid-range of the channel? It's good when it can test the mid-range of the channel, but that's an incomplete story. That's half of the story. Great, it's testing it, but what does it do when it tests it? That's the follow-up question. That's the second piece of the puzzle. And what it did is it flipped it to resistance immediately, right? And it's confirmed that now and sort of situated itself there for an additional 4 days. So until it gets another run at that and can put in a different motion, meaning not just attempt and resistance, then you know, I'm not feeling super bullish about it just yet. But like we said, it didn't need to swing low, or it hasn't yet swung lower than the most recent low. So we'll see if that means anything or not. We do see here in the histogram dying bearish pressure, but if it can't make it to the baseline on the histogram, then you're just going to potentially get a situation like this where it looked like it was dying off and then it just kicked right back up again. So it's all going to depend on if it can get back to that mid-range of the channel. Right now it's 72.21. And if it can, what does it do with it? All right, RVLP. All right, I don't think we need to add anything into this puppy, but we will see. Oh, I'm immediately going to take that back. We have a gap here now. So up over 14% today puts us with a gap here now. I'm going to gray this out. So that gap, if it were to come back down to fill it, it would enter that at 1210, and it would finish filling it. Oh, actually, we don't need a new level. Let me just get rid of this, because it would be right here, give or take like a fraction of a penny. It would fill that at 1146. So, but that's also a support and resistance level that we already had on. That's why I turned it purple. So that when the gap gets filled, if it gets filled, I don't just delete that. This one, I would just delete unless that becomes a support and resistance level. So for the time being, opened up a gap. We'll see if that means much of anything. You know, it's putting in some price action above our 1397, but I mean, nothing close enough in yet that makes a ton of sense to put on the chart, and it looks like we potentially only have recent price action to go off of. So unless we get some motion above there, which we're going to be a little bit in no man's land, support and resistance level wise, but we won't be in no man's land in the channel setup. So we can look at that right now. RVLP. So in the channel, okay, so here's always the question, right? Big drawdown, left the bottom of the channel. We wait for it to get to the mid-range. So here's where I say it can spend, you know, just because it goes out of the channel and we look for it to then revert to the mid-range, that can take a long time. And this is an example of that. You know, it left this back like a month and a half ago or so, and it's just now starting to work itself into the channel, and recent days test the mid-range. So it tested here and kind of wrestled with it. Looked like maybe it was going to lose it there, but then today looking like maybe it's going to take it back. So that's really the question at the moment. As we get our subsequent candles into next week, do we get a confirming of support over the mid-range? And if so, then can we push toward the upper bound of the channel? Or what does that look like? That'll be my big question. Also, we see as it was sort of bobbing and weaving here a little bit, it started to trigger on the TTM squeeze indicator, and then we get some real hiccupy action here. You see firing hiccup, trigger hiccup, firing hiccup, trigger hiccup. So I don't know what that's all about. It doesn't give me a ton of confidence in it at the moment. I don't really know what that means. We see we had a nice call out here where it triggered and then fired, and when it fired, it was on this big down day, and that drew it down all the way down to here. So good call out there. I don't know that it's what it's doing at this point, but it's sort of hiccuping and sputtering and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to focus, if I'm kind of in no man's land at the moment, I'm going to focus on this channel. What can it do with the mid-range of this channel? Is it going to just bleed down further, confirm it as resistance? Is it going to wrestle with it for a period of time and just sort of put in some sideways action? Or can it get support and push up toward the upper bound of the channel? That's sort of the question at the moment for RVLP as far as I'm concerned. Last but not least, NIO. Our old friend NIO still has a gap up here. Would get into the gap around 960, would fill it at 1022-ish. And for the time being, swung low here at 793, pulled up, and this swing high couldn't come up to this swing high, but there's a gap up there. So we'll see what this motion puts in. Right now it's trying, it looks like, to put in a swing low that's higher than these swing lows over here. So could we get some higher low action? Maybe. Sort of waiting to see what is this doing. Is it, it's sort of moving sideways at the moment. Is that going to persist? Is that going to draw down further? Or is it going to come up and try to swing higher than this high? If that, then I would be interested to see sort of like where those waves and those motions are being placed. We might be getting some nice swing action. But that's the question at the moment. What is this developing into? Not really certain on any of it at the moment. Ugly when you zoom in, very barcodey chart, but you see this is just how sideways it is, right? Left this intraday gap here on the 10-minute, has since filled that, but really since at least the third here, the last 4 days has just been caught between this 880 and this 843, and it's tried to stretch out a little bit to either side a time or two, but nothing really of substance coming through. So that's why I say really interested to see what is it doing here. If I'm a bull, I want to see it swing higher than this one here. I want to see it stretch over this 923. Even if it doesn't get like support over there, even if it comes up to like 937 and then comes down and puts in a swing low at like just below 9 and then comes back up again and maybe tries to stretch toward this gap, something like that. I would want to see that type of swing motion to feel that maybe there's some bullish momentum coming into the stock slowly but surely. Now on the think or swim side of things, let's see. So big motion up out of the channel here, quickly pulled down to the mid-range and didn't even put up a fight. Just really lackluster performance by the bulls there. Immediately gave way the mid-range of the channel, tested the lower bound of the channel, and then confirmed resistance, big drop off out the bottom of the channel, and then hasn't made its way back to the mid-range of the channel yet. So again, another confidence booster, if I'm a NIO bull, would be, can it come back and test the mid-range of the channel? And if so, what does it do when it gets there? Does it come in and do sort of like this, right? It comes up, tests it several days, wrestling, confirms support over it, and then it gives it a nice run up out of the upper bound of the channel. And even though it pulled back, right, this is what we were just talking about with the swings, pulled back to a higher low, right, tested the mid-range, support again, what did that result in? An additional push up, right? So if I'm a bull, that's what I'm looking for. And until I can at least get a candle or two with support over the mid-range of that channel, I personally wouldn't feel super confident about it, for the time being. So I'm looking for that swing structure that we talked about over here on the Webull chart as it potentially works through any of these levels. And then I'm looking for anything either toward the mid-range of the channel, or if it's going to pull back further, it's going to have more bullish momentum coming back toward or out of the lower bound of the channel would be the obvious motion there. I don't necessarily have a ton of confidence in the histogram here. Now, granted, this died down and then it just quickly picked up again, right? So it had that sort of like double bear quality to it. That said, to the degree to which this may or may not be anything, the extent to which the histogram reached in the bear's favor this time through was much less than last time through, right? It stretched here this time on the histogram, stretched all the way down here last time. So maybe that's a sign that the bears are kind of like wearing out from NIO a little bit, but that alone wouldn't give me enough confidence, short of something with the mid-range of this channel and some subsequent swing highs and lows like I talked about here earlier. All right, folks, I hope that you had a good trading week and that you enjoy your long weekend. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.